Today, we're going to talk a little bit about being alone. And this is also based on a post by a brother in one of our groups. This brother had a challenging couple of days, but the good news is that despite everything, he stayed accountable in the group prior to his slip. So he shared what we call a slip report. Well, he calls it a slip report. We actually call it a relapse prevention before and after report. So before you slip or relapse, there are a couple of things you can do. And if you slip or relapse, you want to perform an autopsy of sorts to find out what went wrong, to process the data and make sure it doesn't happen again. So he says, I realize that I struggle when I'm alone, and I often feel discontent with aloneness. And so he shared a little bit of a reflection. He says, when I choose to be alone and I have my journal, I am happy. I enjoy my company in solitude. But when aloneness is against my will, I struggle. I feel discontent when I am alone against my will, when I've not chosen to be alone. Then he says, I'm going to focus on this a lot more, learning to be content and happy regardless of circumstance or company. My plan is to do this primarily through dialoguing with my inner child. Any advice is appreciated. I think this brother has done a great job. And I'm going to respond to this to him, but also I'm going to address you, the man who's listening to this. This brother, first of all, it's obvious that he is uncomfortable being alone. But for those of you listening who can relate to this and go like, man, I hate being alone against my will, or alone because it's obligated, I'm going to challenge that. I believe that that's a form of learned helplessness. Being alone is a choice. Unless you're physically incarcerated, you cannot actually be alone against your will. The reason why is even if a man is physically incarcerated, he has the option of being free within his mind. This brother, and most of you who are listening to this podcast, I assume, you're physically free. Yet you have incarcerated your mind somehow whenever you find yourself at home alone. And this is where I recommend that we all begin to work on ourselves when we feel unhappy when we are alone. Often via repeated conditioning, we have associated being alone with a lot of negative self-talk and beliefs. Now, some brothers say that they are depressed. For a lot of men that I work with, they use the word depressed to describe a series of strong emotions, but they're actually not clinically depressed. Words are very important. Often what they say is depressed is simply a mental state brought on by their own conditioning. Some brothers are like, well, you know what, I want intimacy. That's one of the things that I discover when I journal, that I don't want to be alone. I want to have somebody that I'm with. But I'm going to break the news to you that intimacy or a partner is not going to fix this. Instead, what's going to happen is you will develop an unhealthy attachment to your partner. And meaningful work is not going to fix it either, because you will use your quote-unquote meaningful work as an escape from your aloneness, which is not healthy. You have a lot of highly successful men that I've worked with who have everything they need financially, can buy anything they want, yet they cannot stop working to even enjoy these things. Why? Because the minute that they're alone, they start experiencing those strong emotions again. They realize they cannot be alone. So a few things just to note as a summary for those of you who struggle with being alone. Firstly, as long as you're working on your self-talk and your self-compassion, aloneness is actually not going to kill you. You're not going to die from being alone as long as you're working on yourself. The second thing is to understand that you are enough. You should be thrilled to be with yourself, ideally. So how can you seek healthy intimacy when you cannot even be at peace with yourself? How can you expect happiness with someone when you don't even have it in your own life? A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to be happy if I can meet somebody, but you're not a happy person yourself. What do you think is going to happen in the relationship? You're going to suck them of all their happiness. Another person is not causing happiness to grow within you. There has to be a baseline level of happiness already. And that person comes into your life and they improve it. They magnify the happiness you have, or they bring another quality to it, or they add to the quality of your already existing life. But you came into this world alone, and brother, you are going to leave this world alone. Everything that comes in between is an experience, but it's just you on your own. So you have to work on yourself. You have to work alone at finding happiness. And finally is that, remember, whenever you walk into your home, and the moment you leave your friends, the moment you're not doing something that you've chosen to do in solitude, and you're just sitting around doing work, sitting around going through your obligations, and you begin to get that negative feeling, just observe it. Any thoughts that come up that are repeated, any strong emotions that come up, you conditioned yourself to feel that way. Get to know it, show it compassion, show yourself compassion. Understand that before your feelings, there was a conversation in your head. And before that conversation, there was a thought. To find the thought, acknowledge the feelings first. Accept them, don't fight them. Then dialogue and have the conversation. That's going to help you find the original thought. And then use your self-talk to change the thought. And this is how you work your way to the point that you no longer feel negative being alone. I can tell you this from personal experience. I felt horrible alone. I thought that having friends and being in a relationship would change that. It didn't. But the truth is, I wasn't really alone, quote unquote. There were different parts of me, parts that were hidden, parts that were filled with shame, parts that were filled with self-hate. And those were the parts of myself that I was uncomfortable being with. Those were the parts that I had to show compassion. Those were the parts that I had to forgive. Those were the parts that I had to get under control. When I did not do that, I was very, very uncomfortable being alone. But being alone can also be a gift. The solitude is an opportunity for you to get to know those parts of yourself. I hope some of you guys find this helpful.